Good evening, Americans. This is your favorite alien on the evening of Thursday, June 16th, 2022. Well, it's been an eventful day. It was my stepson's birthday, so it was interesting. He took me out to see this new assisted living place. See how that goes, eh? But today, I'm sitting in for Paul Harvey this evening with a special commentary for you Americans, and it applies to all of you. So here it goes. Well, Americans, it's your favorite alien sitting in for Paul Harvey this evening with a special commentary. Juneteenth, which is on Sunday, a day that never lived up to its promise. And why is that? Well, for a number of reasons, and I'll go through all of them for you. African Americans probably thought on June 19th, 1865, that their day was there when General Gordon Ranger, who was sent to Texas as part of the federal forces occupying the South. Reconstruction! By the Lincoln administration / well, it's April 19th, so by now it's the Johnson administration. The only problem with Reconstruction was Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee, and he had no flavor or stomach or idea of Reconstruction. Plus, he didn't want no Yankees in the South. Okay? And General Granger, oh boy, when he delivered that General Order number 3. And General Order number 3 goes back to 1862 in September, when poor President Abraham Lincoln was between a rock and a hard place, where his Union forces, especially the Army of the Potomac, was getting blasted by Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. And other Confederate generals were blasting smaller armies all over the place. Except on the West, where a certain, well, he drank too much, nobody cared about him, Ulysses S. Grant was getting ready to clobber the Confederates. But that was about a year and a half later, okay? This is 1862, May of 1862. Oh yeah, May of 1862, Americans. Remember that? Cinco de Mayo, last month, where you guys were celebrating your Independence Day. Yoo-hoo! Yeah. Well, in May of 1862, June of 1862, and August of 1862, the worst month for the Army of the Potomac. Oh, boy. And though history records a stalemate at Antietam in August of 1862, but you forget about earlier in the year, Shiloh. Oh, boy. And the massacre that happened there. In Antietam, and the massacre that happened there, for the North, it was another Shiloh, even though it was a stalemate. And the North should have gone, yippee, we finally held them at Antietam. But no, the Northern sentiment was, oh no, the South is winning. Can we declare a peace here? And yoo-hoo, President Lincoln, the Confederate States of America have a right to exist. Yoo-hoo! And President Lincoln couldn't take that because remember his inaugural address and his campaign said, preserve the Union. Preserve the Union. But what did you preserve in the Union? He never said that because he didn't know how to do it. He wanted to preserve the Union. But preserve the Union means a lot of things. And that's one thing that Mr. Abraham Lincoln, until the surrender of Appomattox, and then he started thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do next, okay? But here's the problem. He had a meeting with his advisors in the cabinet in September of 1862 to figure out how to change the North point of view as far as losing the war. Okay? And he couldn't find any. Ouch. So he decided to come around with the Emancipation Proclamation, because a proclamation is ceremonial, means nothing. He couldn't do anything about it. Congress couldn't do anything about it. Supreme Court couldn't do anything about it. It was just like Joe Biden saying, I proclaim June 19th to be National Hot Dog Day. See what I mean? Yeah. And we do have a National Hot Dog Day, don't we? I think we do. But we don't have a National Hamburger Day, or do we? Do we have a National Beer Day? Does anybody proclaim any day? A National Chili Day? I know we got a Taco Day. That I know. Yeah, there's got to be one somewhere along the line. Hey, we got Cinco de Mayo, so why not have a Taco Day? Yeah. See what I mean, Americans? And that was poor Mr. Abraham Lincoln's problem. So they left, not doing anything in that September meeting. On January 1863, he put it out there, gambling that it would change the view of the North. Whether it did or not, it's still debatable by a lot of historians. But what it did, it changed the view of the people who were fighting it, especially Ulysses S. Grant, who started to win in the West. He was winning in late 1862. In 1863, he was winning more. And he finally changed the Army of the Potomac to a certain general, George Meade. Remember George Meade? Yeah, he was a lot better than George McClellan. Oh, McClellan. Yeah. McClellan, boy. He was responsible for a lot of deaths in the Union side. Just like Robert E. Lee in the South was responsible for a lot of deaths on the Southern side. The deaths that McClellan came on. And George Meade proved his mantle, whether he liked it or not, at the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st through the 4th, 1863. Yes. Okay. The Unions said, we won. Actually, it was a stalemate, and poor Robert E. Lee suffered a humongous defeat, and he had to retreat. He didn't call it a defeat, it was a stalemate, but he suffered losses that he hadn't suffered earlier in the Union. In fact, McClellan was getting all the losses. Shiloh and Antietam, two of the worst ones. Number 1 and number 2, Bull Runs. Ooh, those were bad. You remember, Americans? Do you? Or you forgot about those, huh? 1863, Gettysburg was the first time the South had gotten those kind of losses. And Mr. Lee decided he wasn't going up north anymore. So he decided to fight in Virginia, which is his hometown, home state, and he knew the wilderness. Well, the war ended up with Lincoln finally calling Ulysses S. Grant to head the Army of the Potomac, and yes, in spite of Coal Harbor, people, and Coal Harbor, they called him the Butcher. Hey, Butcher. How about old Blood and Guts in World War II? Didn't he kill more Americans than Ulysses S. Grant? And Ulysses S. Grant knew you had to do that because he had to go to Robert E. Lee and show him, no matter what my losses, I'm going to be at your neck no matter what. And that's the way to do it. That was what George Patton did to the Germans, and that's why they hated him. And Montgomery, to a certain extent, from the British side in World War II. You get me, Americans? I hope so. Because this relates to Juneteenth. So when Lincoln got the Appomattox surrender of Robert E. Lee on April 9th, 1865, he had no idea what to do. He had the Emancipation Proclamation, but the South wasn't free. The slaves weren't free. That was a proclamation. And the order that was done on June 19th, 5 days after his death by John Wilkes Booth, was only for the state of Texas. And this is what the African Americans have to know. For the state of Texas, that was the order only. The Johnson administration and Andrew Johnson himself, he didn't know what to do. He got caught with his pants down. He was so drunk when Lincoln got assassinated, it wasn't even funny. But here he is, President of the United States, a Southerner from Tennessee, with states in the Union, 5 states in the Union. That's Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Kansas, yoo-hoo, Kansas, no, not Kansas, pardon me. The other state that you had there, that's Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Don't forget Maryland and the 5th state, Americans. The 5th state, yoo-hoo, Delaware, who had slaves. Do you get me, Americans? Who were still under slavery. There was no Emancipation Proclamation for them. And there was no General Order Number 3 for them. So the Republicans, or as they were called, the radical Republicans, didn't know what to do. Here they had these 2 orders, General Order from Texas, number 3, the Emancipation Proclamation, 5 states with slaves still on the books. Yeah. And this is 1865. So they decided to pass the 13th Amendment in 1865. And in 1868, they passed the 14th Amendment. In 1870, they passed the 15th Amendment. Those amendments were political, Americans, political. It didn't resolve any other problems. Just like the people who created the problems from the Supreme Court with the Dred Scott decision of 1857 didn't eliminate, and didn't solve any problems either. They created more problems. So here we are with 3 amendments that are politically motivated, that give the African Americans everything they want to the detriment of the South, because that's the way the radical Republicans wanted it. And this is why I tell you all along, Americans, that your political, your executive, and your legislative, your executive, and your judiciaries have messed you up, and none of them had cleaned up their messes. And this is why you're in the state you are today. Thus, January 19th, 1865 became a slaughterhouse for African Americans in the South during the Johnson administration. Big time. A ton of African Americans were killed because of Juneteenth, or the Emancipation Proclamation, or the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And the way the Congress created the 14th Amendment it had all those clauses that allowed later Supreme Court and Congresses and presidents to use them on the way they wanted to create the disaster that you created almost 20 years after the Civil War ended. By 1895, you had a disaster. And the reason you had a disaster was because in 1876, you were still politically motivated. You Republicans wanted to keep the presidency at all costs with Rutherford B. Hayes, and the Democrats in the South, especially called the Redeemers, wanted to bring the South back to order. Because during the Ulysses Grant administration from 1869 to 72, he eliminated the KKK, which was causing all kinds of problems over there. The KKK was mostly all dead. It started reviving around 1895 here and there until 1915 when the second KKK was formed. The KKK that you know today, not the KKK that was formed in 1865. So in 1876, there was a backroom deal done where Rutherford got the presidency, the South got, the Democrats got the South, and the Democrats in the South began to eliminate the power of the African American from Juneteenth, from the Emancipation Proclamation, from the 13th, 14th, and 15th, by passing laws using the clause of the 14th Amendment that was surely watering them down. In the Supreme Court, when they packed them between 1880 and 1895, also looked the other way and started watering down the 14th Amendment's clauses with their decisions. Their final one, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, caused separate but equal segregation. And there wasn't no integration of the African Americans and later on the other people that came in through your immigration door opening, because you opened the door and you had a big floodgate that came in between 1870 and 1900. Oh boy, did you have a floodgate. This would make the floodgate that's coming in through your southern border look like cheese. Yes. You get me, Americans? So by 1896, after the Plessy versus Ferguson, and the South, because of the American robber barons like Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, they needed jobs up north, so they went up north. And then Henry Ford with his cars, and later on General Motors and everybody else, and they needed steel and cars, and oh boy, you needed people to work, so here comes the Southern Americans, the African Americans, into the northern part. And for the next 75 years, boy, did they have fun, huh? A lot of lynchings, a lot of killings, both in the north and south. Juneteenth, it was kind of forgotten, wasn't it? Yes. And then came the 1950s, where the Congress, after looking at all the problems, and also the Supreme Court, which by 1900 figured out they made a mistake and started watering up the 14th Amendment, little by little, changing the fact. And World War II had a lot to do with that, because you needed the Buffalo Soldiers back and integrating into a fighting force with Americans. Yes, they didn't like it, but hey, they had to do it because you needed that. Therefore, by 1954, the Supreme Court decided that Plessy Ferguson was not a good example, so they created the Brown versus the Board of Education and started what became what you call the civil rights in African American territory. From 1954 to 65, it was a disaster of things. You got a lot of people killed, bombings all over the place. Yes. 1965, another Johnson took power because of another president getting assassinated. Lyndon Johnson. And he was from another southern state, Texas, as Tennessee was before. But he decided to, hey, revive the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in their proper order with the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Why did you have to redo that? Well, because you didn't learn your lesson from Juneteenth. And you still haven't learned your lesson from Juneteenth. The lesson was, okay, you won the war, the African Americans are supposed to be free, integrate them, and later on, people that come into the United States, into your United States society, and you never have done that. You have never integrated the Chinese, the Asians, the Japanese. You never integrated the African Americans, the Latins. You haven't even integrated the Irish and Italians, even though they're part of the United States and they think they are, but they're still Irish Americans, Italian Americans, German Americans. Oh, yeah. See what I mean? So here we are today, June 16, 2022, and we still got the same problem we had on June 19, 1865. And nobody cares a damn. So what are you going to do, Americans? You got to figure out all your problems, and you created new ones over the decades, over the centuries, century and a half already. You have created new problems on top of Juneteenth. And the only way you can stop them is Juneteenth first, put it as a cornerstone, and go from there. But can you do it? No. Because you don't have either the legislative gumption, the executive gumption, or the judicial gumption to make your country right. And until you have that, you are dead in the water and disintegrating, and you'll be a footnote in the history of this universe. This is your favorite alien sitting in for Paul Harvey. Good day.